Coming up on Arirang News, the U.S. and China reportedly sign off on a Phase 1 trade deal, boosting hopes for a trade truce and sending stock markets soaring. Boris Johnson's Conservative Party returns a comfortable majority in the UK general election, giving him what he says is a mandate to get Brexit done. And the European Central Bank, taking its cue from the Fed, keeps interest rates steady at 0% and will keep up its asset purchases of 20 billion euros a month. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. It was 100 years ago that Koreans launched the March 1st independence movement and established a provisional government abroad. Today, President Moon Jae-in stressed that it's important to reflect on whether true equality in society has been achieved.
또 다른 특권의 정치가 이어지고 번영 속의 심각한 경제적 불평등이 또 다른 신분과 차별을 만들고 있지는 않은지 우리 스스로 겸허하게 되돌아봐야 할 때입니다.
This was at a Blue House luncheon with members of a presidential committee that prepared commemorative events for the centennial of the independence movement against Japan's colonial rule and the establishment of Korea's provisional government. President Moon said the next 100 years should enable people to prosper together in fairness, freedom, and equality. He also emphasized that peace on the Korean peninsula can be achieved only through joint efforts. The president vowed to do his best to rekindle the history of the independence movement so that future generations can lead the next century. The U.S. has reportedly been asking South Korea to send troops to the Strait of Hormuz, a key shipping route for oil, which Iran has been threatening to close. The presidential office says a deployment there is a possibility, it's considered, and there's speculation that it might go through with it as a way to gain leverage in the negotiations with Washington on sharing the cost of stationing American troops here. Shin Se-min has the details.
South Korea's presidential office says it has reviewed the possibility of sending Korean troops to form an allied forces fleet to safeguard waters in the Strait of Hormuz, with tensions mounting in the Middle East in recent months. During the weekly session of the National Security Council on Thursday, presided over by the nation's top security chief Chung Eui-yong, the top office said its standing members have agreed to beef up Korea's cooperation with neighboring countries for progress in the Korean peace drive. And they also discussed ways to protect Koreans and ships in the vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz and contribute to the international community's maritime security efforts in that region. It's the first time in months that the South Korean government has openly mentioned the idea of sending troops to the region during an NSC meeting in July. Speculation lingers that the possible deployment may also be directed at the ongoing negotiations between Seoul and Washington over the sharing the defense costs for American troops stationed in South Korea. This especially as the NSC meeting's readout also said it talked about strategy in the tough negotiations with Washington on military defense cost sharing. The idea of sending a Korean warship to the Middle East came to light shortly after a visit by the U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton, now removed from the post, to Seoul in July this year, with multiple sources familiar with the topic saying that Washington wishes for Seoul to send troops to the region. The U.S. had consistently been trying to build international support for a military coalition in the seas off Iran and Yemen, to which Australia, the UK, and Bahrain have already joined. And if Seoul decides to assist the U.S.-led campaign, it is likely the 300-men-strong Cheonghae unit in the Gulf of Aden may be deployed to the coalition. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Satellite imagery shows new activity at North Korea's Dongchang-ri missile launching site, where the North says a very important test was conducted last week. It's also the site North Korean leader Kim Jong-un had promised to shut down when he met with U.S. President Donald Trump in Singapore last June. An exclusive article posted by U.S.-based monitoring website 38 North on Friday contained satellite imagery taken 2 days prior, showing a 10-meter-long truck sitting next to one of the fuel bunkers near the site's vertical engine test stand. However, due to the image's limited resolution, 38 North didn't provide a detailed assessment. Voice of America cited an expert to report that North Korea could currently launch projectiles from the site. The North started to restore it after the breakdown of the second North Korea-U.S. summit in Hanoi earlier this February. And the deadline North Korea has imposed for progress in the nuclear talks is coming up in just a couple of weeks, at the end of the year. Because of that, there are growing concerns the regime might engage in more provocations. Still, the U.S. is hoping that the regime will refrain from nuclear and long-range missile tests. Kim Min-ji reports.
The U.S. hopes North Korea refrains from any nuclear and long-range missile tests. Amid speculation, the regime could conduct further provocations in the coming weeks. Speaking at the Pentagon on Thursday, Rear Admiral William Burn, the Defense Department's Joint Staff Vice Director, said he hopes the regime sticks to its commitments, but didn't share further information when asked if Washington has seen indications Pyongyang is preparing for a test.
We'd hope that they would abide by those words, but hope is not a strategy. As the Secretary said up on Capitol Hill yesterday, we hope for the best and we plan for the worst.
Burns said the U.S. takes North Korea's rhetoric seriously, and together with South Korea, Washington is putting the appropriate defenses in place to meet such threats. His remarks come as the North has given the U.S. until the year's end to take a more flexible approach and make concessions in their denuclearization talks, or else it'll take a new path. Separately, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs David Stilwell also warned the North against conducting further provocations. Speaking at an event in Washington on Thursday, he reiterated President Trump's offer to help build North Korea's economy, but said there cannot be any more belligerent behavior.
But there's also the reminder that we can't have any more of this unfortunate, ill-advised behavior. And that hasn't changed. That position is the same.
The remarks come after North Korea criticized the U.S. for convening a UN Security Council meeting on its provocations. In a statement carried by its state-run Korean Central News Agency, Pyongyang said it helped them decide on which path they'll take. The UN Security Council met on Wednesday to discuss North Korea's recent missile tests, as well as the possibility of an escalated provocation. Pyongyang slammed Washington for criticizing its weapons tests conducted in its own territory, while the U.S. freely conducts weapons tests. North Korea also reiterated it has nothing more to lose and is ready to respond to Washington's actions. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
In other news, the Seoul Christmas Festival begins today, the theme this year being Walking with Santa Along the Path of Light. Back for a fifth year, the festival runs through New Year's Day along the Cheonggyecheon stream downtown, where there's a Santa-themed village. From the Santa Village to the Jangtong-gyo Bridge, the path will be covered in Christmas-themed LED lights. The opening ceremony starts at 5:30 p.m. at Cheonggye Plaza. The U.S. and China have reportedly signed a Phase 1 trade deal, raising hopes that a truce in the trade war is around the corner and sending stock markets soaring. Korea's economy could see major benefits as well. Our Hong Yu has the latest.
Rumbling on for nearly a year and a half, the U.S.-China trade war that has dampened the global economy may be coming to an end. Washington has reached a Phase 1 trade deal in principle with Beijing. According to Bloomberg citing sources familiar with the situation, U.S. President Donald Trump has signed off on the deal, and an official announcement from the White House could come soon. The report said the terms of the deal have been agreed, but the legal text has not yet been finalized. Reuters reported Beijing has agreed to buy $50 billion of American agricultural goods in 2020 as part of the deal. One expert says China might have agreed to this to prevent further tariffs from the U.S.
Because agricultural goods play an important role in American exports, it must have meant a lot for the US when China said they will buy their agricultural goods. In return, this means that their relationship is not going to get worse than it is, and gradually the US is likely to lower its tariffs.
He added that this deal will mean items such as semiconductors will see a price increase, which will particularly help South Korea's economy.
The destination of most South Korean goods is China. So if China's trade with the US flourishes, so will China's imports from Korea.
The news caused South Korea's credit default swap to reach its lowest on record on Thursday. A lower credit default swap means there is less risk of bankruptcy. Meanwhile, U.S. stocks hit record highs on Thursday following the reports of a signed trade deal. Both the S&P 500 and Nasdaq jumped nearly 1% and closed at all-time highs, ending the day at 3,168 and 8,717 respectively. The Dow Jones Industrial Average climbed more than 300 points at one point before calming down, but still finished higher at 28,132. Hongyu, Arirang News.
In Britain's general election on Thursday, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative Party has won a majority, and he says a mandate to get Brexit done. Projections have the Tories getting more than 360 seats, flipping several districts that had long been Labour strongholds. Exit polls show Labour winning around 191 seats. Oh Soo-young reports.
3.5 years after Britain's fateful vote to leave the European Union, will Thursday's election finally clear up the uncertainty? The snap election ended with the majority of Parliament's 650 seats going to Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative Party and their pledge to get Brexit done. The main opposition, Labour, meanwhile, suffered a crushing defeat.
Many people in the UK, 3 years after the Brexit vote, they don't want to discuss this anymore, and they feel that Brexit should happen, and that's what the Conservative Party was promising. But secondly, and I think this is very important, Jeremy Corbyn himself, the leader of the Labour Party, is quite unpopular. And his policies, not all of them were unpopular, but there was this perception that he was maybe too left-wing for the UK. And I think that made many traditional Labour voters reluctant to vote for him.
Boris Johnson had called for an early election to garner more support for his hardline Brexit plan, pledging the UK would leave the EU by January 31st, and that the period of determining Britain's relationship with the EU would not be extended beyond December 2020. But experts say this may be easier said than done.
Many members of the Conservative Party who have been voted in, who are going to be MPs, they actually support, for example, staying in the single market or staying in a customs union. It is going to divide the party once more. So I think the deadlock will continue when it comes to the negotiation of the future relationship with the European Union.
I think for a lot of people and for a lot of the economic factors, just getting something over the line will remove a lot of this insecurity. If Britain does leave the EU on January the 31st, then it will have to start renegotiating deals around the world with other countries. We've already had some agreements with South Korea. There will be other ones with America, China, big economic players, but then also smaller middle powers.
Brexit could be done in the months to come, with Johnson staying in Downing Street. But that won't be the end of the Brexit story. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The European Central Bank has decided to keep interest rates steady in its latest meeting as the Eurozone economy struggles with low growth. But it did reveal some ambitious plans to get the economy growing again. Yoon Jung-min tells us more.
At the first meeting on Thursday presided over by new President Christine Lagarde, the European Central Bank left the key interest rate unchanged at 0%. Following the decision, the ECB's rate on bank overnight deposits will remain at a record low of -0.5%, and the marginal lending facility rate will stay at 0.25%. The bank said it will maintain an accommodative stance and stimulus policy because the Eurozone economy has continuously suffered from low growth and global risks. The ECB added it will continue its policy of purchasing net assets at a monthly rate of 20 billion euros or about $22 billion, which started in November. Lagarde unveiled her ambitious economic plan, which will include climate change issues, the U.S. China trade negotiations, and rising protectionism. Most of all, the new president said she will strategically review the steps forward and have the plans completed before the end of next year.
That strategic review needs to be comprehensive, needs to look at all and every issues, will turn each and every stone. By that I mean, my plan is to actually get the review started in the course of January.
The ECB forecast the annual GDP growth for the Eurozone at 1.2% for this year, slightly higher than its previous forecast. But it has slightly lowered its forecast for next year to 1.1% from its earlier projection. It expects the Eurozone economy to grow 1.4% in 2021 and in 2022. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Friday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me today.
So with the U.S. and China reportedly reaching this deal on a phase one deal on trade, it would seem they could be nearing a truce in this trade war. And Wall Street, we saw the main stock indices touch record highs in Thursday's session. What's the story?
Yes. As I've been saying, that the first phase will be done within this year, as the Trump administration also said today or last night that they have reached a phase one trade deal with China in principle, pending approval from the President Donald Trump. Trump met with the top advisors on Thursday about the trade with China, whether to go ahead and raise the tariff on 160 billion won worth of Chinese-made goods by 15%. And it seems that they have decided that they will scrap that. And also they will be possibly lowering the tariff, the existing tariff they have, which is right now about 360 billion worth of the Chinese products. Trump has been focusing on the also U.S. agricultural products that China will purchase as part of the deal, and that it seems that the deal might be made where that China will be buying more than 40 billion worth of goods, maybe as high as 50 billion worth of goods. Trump has said that they very close to the big deal with China, and also he said that they want it and also we want it as well, which means that exactly what I've been saying. Both countries need to do this deal. Without that, you will see a massive rise of inflation for U.S. As for China, we'll have probably more furthering of lowering growth rate, which will be quite troublesome for global economy as a whole. So the deal will be made quite soon. Markets have cheered, as you said. The overall U.S. market have reached the top record high level. It seems that China also have rebounded quite significantly today by more than 1.7%. Most of the Asian market also have shown quite strong movement, as well as U.S. and Europe.
Yeah, Korean stocks sharply higher today, also on U.S.-China trade. What's the news in the Korean markets today and your outlook as well?
Sure. Kospi is up 1.54%. Kosdaq is about 1%. As you know, the foreign investors have been net seller of Korean equity market for the last several weeks. But after the option and futures trading closed maturity on yesterday, the net buying has started to come in. And also the Korean won has appreciated quite significantly as well. Overall, corporate governance issue is the main concern for Korea, but we think that that problem will probably gradually improve in the future. And the profitability of Korean companies should rise gradually from current less than 6% territory to as high as 9% in the future. If that all happens, then yes, we do think that Kospi will rise further. Based on our residual income models, we expect Kospi to rise by around 20% level over the next 12 months. And also Kosdaq up probably rise by around 15 to 17%. So overall, we think that the trend should be definitely positive going forward.
Got it. Well, another big mover today was the Korean won. It gained well over 1% against the dollar today, dipping below 11.70. Where do you see the $1 rate going from here?
Right. As you said, Korean won has appreciated by more than 1.5% just alone today. That's a quite significant move. Went from well above 11.90 to well below 11.70. Now, if you look at the currency-wise, we think that when it hit the 12.23, we think that was too much of depreciation relative to its fundamentals. So therefore, more fair value would be where we are. So we think that the currency should stabilize somewhere between 11.50 to 11.70 territories. Given that the Korea's GDP growth rate is at around 2% plus, which is definitely higher than U.S. level. And also, we do expect the fiscal policies to be much more accommodative for Korea going forward, as well as monetary policy should be quite easing to support the economic growth rate. If that's the case, we think that Korea can achieve 2% growth rate in terms of GDP. Therefore, the currency should be fairly stable in the future.
All right, Mr. Yu, the trade issue affecting all kinds of things. We'll see how it shakes out next week. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Now, South Korea's export prices fell for the third consecutive month in November. The Bank of Korea says they dropped 1.8% on month on the strengthening Korean won and falling prices of chemical goods and electronic goods. On year, export prices were down 6.2%. Export prices of industrial goods, including electronics, slid around 2% on month. Import prices fell 1% on month, despite a slight rise in global oil prices due to the stronger local currency. Some gloomy news for the South Korean economy. Service output and consumption are increasing, but exports and construction investment continue to fall. The latest monthly Green Book from the Finance Ministry released today shows South Korea's exports plunged in November by 14% from a year earlier, marking their 12th straight month in decline. The ministry said the slowdown is due to weak global trade, a sluggish local manufacturing sector, as well as uncertainties stemming from Japan's export curbs on Korea and the state of the global semiconductor industry. The ministry promised its utmost efforts to boost the economy. Next week, it'll unveil its economy policy direction for 2020. South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics will reportedly increase its investment at one of its plants in China to boost production of NAND flash memory chips. Kim Hae-sung reports.
Samsung Electronics will invest an additional $8 billion into its memory chip plant in Xi'an, China by 2021. According to Chinese media, Samsung Electronics will use the additional investment to ramp up its production of NAND flash memory chips, which are used to hold data permanently and are found in mobile devices, USB flash drives, and other electronic devices. This comes after Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said in October that a total of $15 billion will be spent on Samsung's second Xi'an plant. In 2017, Samsung signed an MOU with the Chinese government to construct a second plant at Xi'an and announced plans to invest $7 billion over 3 years. Samsung's first Xi'an plant has been manufacturing chips since 2014. Its second plant is expected to begin operations in the first half of next year. Once complete, the second plant is expected to produce 130,000 wafers a month. The two plants are Samsung's only memory chip producing facilities outside South Korea. Samsung holds nearly a third of the global market share in the NAND flash chip business. The South Korean tech giant's investment comes as the memory chip market is expected to rebound next year because of limited supplies and rising demand for fifth-generation devices and networks, which could help further boost its position in NAND flash chips. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
The value of the Saudi state oil company Aramco has reached $2 trillion, the price tag hoped for by the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Aramco became the world's most valuable company with its IPO on Wednesday, surging that day by the daily limit of 10%. But with another rise of about 4.5% on Thursday, it had essentially reached the $2 trillion mark, with one share worth $9.81. The oil giant is now worth far more than the world's previously most valuable company, Apple, which is valued at some $1.2 trillion. Saudi Aramco's market cap is also 7 times higher than that of South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics. To attract more tourists to South Korea, the government is issuing more multiple entry visas for tourists from China and Southeast Asia. The policy was announced Thursday at a ministers' meeting headed by Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon. Currently, multiple entry visas can be applied for by Chinese nationals who reside in one of China's 13 big cities, including Beijing and Shanghai. The new policy will expand eligibility for those visas to include people who spend roughly $22,000 a year through the mobile payment system Alipay. For people from Southeast Asian countries, eligibility will be expanded to those with $200,000 or more in personal assets. With multiple entry visas, tourists are allowed to enter several times within the 5-year period of the visa. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.
South Korea and Japan are engaged in talks